Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know those books you see in dusty old libraries that always seem kind of off limits?
The ones with the strange symbols and the whispers about curses,
Those are the kind of books we explore here on Occult Archives.
where we uncover the mysteries, the myths, the legends behind some of history's most feared and fascinating texts.
And today we've got a real doozy.
One you listeners have been requesting for a while now.
Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry by Albert Pike.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's also been called the forbidden blueprint of occult Freemasonry and hidden truths of the ancient mysteries.
Oh.
I mean,
That's quite a title.
right. How could we not dive into that? Now, this book,
It's a bit of a behemoth.
it really is, covers everything from the nature of God and the soul to morality, symbolism, ancient philosophies.
So we're going to try to break it down for you.
Yeah, give you the key insights without needing, secret decoder ring.
Exactly. We want you to walk away with a solid grasp of what Pike's getting at.
Without feeling like you've got to join a secret society to understand it.
Right.
So Pike kicks things off, talking about guiding principles. And he's got this really interesting idea about the blind force of the people.
Oh,
Now, when he says blind, he's not talking about vision.
right.
It's more like saying
Untamed.
untamed, yeah. Or like a force that needs direction.
Like a powerful river without banks to guide it.
Exactly. Can cause a lot of damage. And for Pike, that guiding force is intellect.
The ability to reason, to think critically.
Right. He even compares it to a compass on a ship,
Small instrument, but it guides that massive vessel.
always pointing north, keeping it on course. And where's this intellect-guided force heading? To smash superstitions, despotisms, and prejudices.
The big obstacles to progress.
Exactly. But it's not just about power, right? It's got to be guided by something good. And for Pike, that's truth and love.
Truth as in knowledge and understanding.
Yep. And love as in compassion, empathy, connection.
But those are still forces. They need direction, too.
He's got you there. And that's where the rule of right and justice and of combined and systematic movement and effort come in.
So it's about focused energy directed toward good.
Right. Not just running around with good intentions.
It's going to be organized and thought out.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. He ties this all back to the divine.
Okay.
He says even God's power is balanced by his wisdom. So there's this inherent harmony built into the universe.
That balance of forces is key.
Right. Okay, so shifting gears a bit. Pike spends a lot of time on this idea of the soul's journey.
Okay.
This ancient belief that the soul has to ascend through different spheres to get back to the infinite.
Back to its source.
Right. He mentioned some big names, too. Clemens of Alexandria Philo-Judaeus.
These are heavy hitters in early Christian thought.
For sure. And this isn't just some abstract theory. He links it to concrete symbols,
Like what?
like the ladder with 7 degrees in the Mysteries of Mithras.
Oh, wow. The Mithraic mysteries. Those were big in Roman times.
Huge. And this ladder, it symbolized the soul's climb through those spheres.
Like Jacob's ladder in the Bible.
Exactly. With angels going up and down, connecting heaven and earth. And those Mithraic rituals, they get pretty wild.
I've heard they took place in caves.
Yeah. And they had these gates that marked the equinoxes and solstices.
Representing the soul's passage through the cosmos.
Yeah, it's like they were mapping out the soul's journey on a grand scale.
Like an ancient planetarium.
And that ladder, it shows up again too.
Yeah.
7 rounds or steps symbolizing initiation,
7 keeps popping up.
doesn't it? And Pike finds a similar thing in the Pyramid of Borsippa. 7 stages, each a different color.
It's like this universal archetype, this journey of 7 stages.
Okay, so let's get into the Masonic stuff now. Pike talks about the great lights and furniture of the lodge.
The Holy Bible, the square and the compasses.
Those are the essentials. Can't have a lodge without them.
Right. And that's caused some debate over the years.
It has. Because not everyone views the Bible as the ultimate sacred text.
Especially the New Testament.
Right, Pike addresses this head on, though. He says the Bible's essential in a Christian lodge because it's their sacred book. But in a Hebrew lodge, you'd have the Pentateuch.
And the Quran in a Muslim lodge?
Exactly. It's about respecting everyone's faith.
Taking the obligation on what you hold most sacred.
Right, and that's why they ask about your beliefs when you join.
It's a personal commitment.
Now, about the square and compasses. Pike says the square represents earthly things. Geometry, the physical body.
Because it's all about right angles and straight lines.
Compasses, they're about the heavens,
The
soul.
circles, the infinite.
But here's the thing. Even though the compass points are under the square in this degree,
Showing the focus on morality and responsibility.
right, there's still this blending of the divine and the human. the spiritual and the earthly.
Even in everyday life.
He even says nations have souls, not just bodies.
Interesting. So a nation can be morally good or bad.
That's what he's getting at.
Right.
Okay, now about human nature. Pike says we shouldn't just assume everyone's a hypocrite.
It's tempting to think that sometimes
It is. But he says true systematic hypocrisy is pretty rare.
just too hard to keep up the act all the time.
Exactly. It's usually superficial people who make those judgments. And he's pretty blunt about the fact that what people say they believe,
Often doesn't match up with how they act.
oh yeah. He even uses this example.
Let me guess, politicians.
Well, politicians too. But he says in the Orient, Muslims are generally more honest than Christians.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
It is. But he's trying to show that actions speak louder than words.
That culture plays a big role, too.
Now, here's a question. How do we measure a society's intelligence?
By their IQ scores.
Not quite. Pike says it's about the great individuals they produce,
Okay.
and more importantly, how well they receive them.
So it's not enough to just have brilliant people.
No. The society has to be ready to listen and learn from them. He uses Edmund Burke as an example. This brilliant guy would give speeches in Parliament, and everyone would just walk out.
They couldn't follow him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was just too far ahead of them.
So the most profound truths can sound like nonsense to the unprepared.
That's it. And he ties this back to Masonry.
How so?
He says the way they explain their symbols. It's appropriate for the level of most members.
Okay, so there are deeper meanings for those who seek them.
But he's not putting anyone down. He says truths are relative
Relative to what?
to their time and the people hearing them.
Oh.
Like Zoroaster, Confucius, Mohammed, they all preach truths. But those truths were for their specific time and place. So if people hold on to those older truths, even when new ones emerge,
He doesn't see it as their fault.
right, it's more like a misfortune. Okay, now this is where it gets really cool. Pike talks about the interconnectedness of everything,
Right.
like how tiny little events can have huge historical consequences.
Give me an example.
Okay, like a peasant boy just happens to guide a general down a certain path.
And that changes the outcome of a battle.
Exactly. Or a blacksmith forgets to secure a horseshoe.
And a king's horse stumbles.
Yeah. These tiny things can ripple out and change the course of empires.
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing.
Right, he calls it the adamantine chain of indissoluble connection.
So everything's linked.
Even the smallest things. He even uses the example of a locust. This tiny little bug can cause famine and economic collapse.
That's incredible.
And he says it's just as much a minister of God as an earthquake.
Meaning.
Meaning, even the seemingly insignificant things can have massive impact. He brings up the Civil War, too, how something so huge,
Could be sparked by something totally random.
like the vote of some guy who doesn't even understand the issues.
That's scary.
It is, but it's not just physical events. It's ideas, too.
Oh, yeah, ideas can be powerful.
He mentions Faust Luther. Even a silly song can unseat a king.
Words have power.
So much power. Okay, let's talk about republics and despotism. Pike's a big believer in giving people the tools to govern themselves.
The tools to the workmen.
Exactly. But he also warns that republics decay when the least capable people are in charge.
So you need an informed and engaged citizenry.
Absolutely. But as bad as democracy can get.
Despotism is way worse.
Oh yeah. He lists off these tyrants. Tiberius, Nero, Caligula.
Those guys were brutal.
It's like he's saying freedom is precious, even if it's messy sometimes. And he has this advice for great men who can't get elected fairly.
What's that?
Stay home and write. Let history judge the wrongdoers.
Interesting. So the pen is mightier than the sword.
He calls it the revenges of the intellect.
That's a good one.
He also points out how those in power, even in republics,
Can get complacent.
and push aside the really smart people.
Yeah, nobody likes to be shown up.
But he does think there's a role for a central authority
To do what?
to ensure justice.
Okay.
But he warns about it getting too big and interfering too much,
Power tends to do that.
doesn't it? But he also says sometimes that central power,
Might need to step in when the people are being unjust.
yeah, it's this balancing act between individual freedom and the need for order.
Complex stuff.
Okay, back to symbolism. Pike says those ancient mystic rituals,
Weren't meant to be straightforward explanations.
right, he calls them the opening of a problem.
Designed to make you think.
Exactly. And he says they weren't against philosophy.
Because philosophy helps us interpret symbols.
But there's a danger he warns about
What's that?
when symbols turn into dogma.
Fixed and unquestionable.
Yeah, that's when you get intolerance and closed-mindedness. He also brings up the question of the soul. Have we really figured out what it is, even with all our science?
Good question.
And he suggests those ancient explanations about the soul's journey,
They might have been allegories for initiates.
like secret teachings hidden in plain sight.
Fascinating.
Okay, switching gears again, Pike has some strong words about commercial avarice.
Greed, basically.
Yeah, he says a nation that's only focused on its own interests
Will end up acting unjustly.
and won't have any real friends among other nations.
Makes sense.
He uses India as an example,
Well,
saying commercial greed there.
led to more atrocities than even empire building.
It's a powerful indictment of unchecked ambition. And he says a nation obsessed with global commerce,
Can become selfish and lose its morals.
like willing to compromise its honor for a good deal.
That's a slippery slope.
Now let's talk about light. Pike makes it clear that light isn't spirit itself.
But it's the instrument of spirit.
Right, like the most basic way we see the divine in the physical world. He talks about high magic as the sacerdotal art and the royal art,
Okay.
and says it's always been tied to the powers of priests and kings. He also points out that any philosophy that challenges the dominant religion,
Is going to run into trouble with the political powers.
because they get their authority from that religion.
Yeah, it's a power struggle.
He's got this great line, every crown is shattered when it clashes against the tiara.
Ooh, that's a good word.
Now on to the true Mason. What does it really mean to be one?
Yeah.
Pike says it's not just about knowing some basic stuff about architecture and morality.
It's got to be deeper than that.
Right. He says if you're content with that surface level,
Then that's fine.
but to really understand the beauty of Masonry,
Yeah, put in the work.
study, reflect, absorb the material. He says the true Mason,
Is an ardent seeker after knowledge.
someone who sees the value in books and ancient symbols.
Okay, so it's a lifelong pursuit.
Now let's get into moral discipline. Pike says the flaws of others aren't just their problem.
They're part of our own moral education.
Like even those scandals and conflicts we see in the news?
They can affect us morally.
Exactly. He says thoughtful people are sensitive to these things. He paints this picture of someone struggling with addiction and says a casual observer might just laugh or judge.
But a Mason sees a fellow human being.
Someone who's lost their way and feels compassion instead of contempt.
That's a powerful image.
He also says a Mason looks at all the bad stuff happening in the world.
And sees deeper meaning.
He calls them solemn conflicts of immortal minds.
Wow.
It's like he's saying the real stakes are so much higher than we usually think. Like those people chasing after power and money.
They're actually harming themselves the most.
That's Pike's point. He says God views them with displeasure.
But also compassion.
Right. And that should guide our response, too.
Yeah.
He reminds us that everyone's vulnerable. Any one of us could end up on the wrong path,
So even the worst offenders deserve our pity.
along with any condemnation they might deserve. Okay, now for the heart of Masonry. What does it stand for? Love of God and neighbor. Truthfulness. Fidelity, equity. Impartiality.
The good stuff.
Yeah. And this commitment to preserving human society, intellectual growth, moderation.
Sounds like a recipe for a good life.
And he says Masonry has always preserved this enlightened faith.
That fosters devotion, brotherhood, forgiveness.
Peace, hope, consolation, duty.
It's like a blueprint for a better world.
And he's adamant that Masonry doesn't reject the world. It's not about detaching from earthly life.
It's about engaging with it.
Fully engaging. He says we have duties and destinies to fulfill here. This life isn't just a waiting room for the next one.
It has its own inherent value.
He wants us to experience the world, to learn from it, to love it, to make it better.
To find joy in the present moment.
And he says this earthly life is actually part of our immortality. And this world is just one among many in the vast cosmos.
Wow, that's a beautiful thought.
He even gets poetic, saying life is glorious.
Because of human virtue and kindness?
Right. And that even the humblest life is connected to the infinite.
We all have potential for lasting impact.
When we face adversity, Pike reminds us we shape our own fortunes.
Our response matters.
It's what defines us. He says we should value honesty over fear of death,
Patience over anger, humility over pride.
and contentment over greed.
Powerful stuff.
He even says suffering isn't evil. It's a teacher,
Teaching us wisdom through consequence.
leading us to growth and improvement. He wants us to cultivate a brave heart, a strong spirit,
To face difficulties head on.
and to see sorrow as part of a greater plan.
A plan for ultimate happiness.
He talks about how relationships are delicate, easily disrupted,
By negativity.
and he even imagines what it would be like to not feel anything,
No pain, no pleasure.
and suggests that maybe our worst tendencies would take over.
because we wouldn't feel the
It's
consequences.
their capacity for feeling that makes us human. Now, Pike gets into the mysteries of God's Hebrew name.
The tetragrammaton.
Yeah, he says Jehovah is probably not the original pronunciation, and that ancient symbols always had multiple layers of meaning.
Okay.
He also lays out some basic Masonic obligations,
Like what?
making honor and duty your guiding principles,
Doing what's right because it's right,
fighting against ignorance and intolerance.
but still showing compassion and understanding.
It's about finding that balance. He emphasizes that Masonry unites people of all faiths.
Christians, Hebrews, Muslims,
Everyone. They all share a belief in one God.
and Masonry doesn't tell you what to believe.
Right. That's up to your own sacred texts.
Yeah.
But he says Masonry finds its truths written on the heart of man.
And in the Book of Nature.
Truths that resonate with anyone who's good and true. He describes Masonry's ongoing battle against ignorance and intolerance. He says it's a tough fight, facing apathy even from its own members.
And indifference from the world.
But he also points out that great things are often accomplished,
By individuals, not by massive movements.
and that those who do good are often met with opposition.
It's the way of the world, unfortunately.
But he ends on a hopeful note, urging everyone to aspire to a noble destiny,
And to live by Masonic principles.
so that their inner being becomes a temple of the living God.
Powerful stuff.
Okay, now we enter the philosophical degrees, starting with the Knight of the East and West. Pike says this is where the deeper mysteries of Masonry start to unfold.
Your real inner teachings.
He tells us not to be discouraged if things haven't clicked yet.
Because truth is always hidden beneath symbols and allegories.
Our human understanding is just a reflection of the divine.
An imperfect reflection.
He brings up Pythagoras and Plato,
Those guys were deep.
and he says they had these secret doctrines, just like the Egyptians and Persians.
A hidden tradition of knowledge.
He even connects Platonism to Gnosticism and Masonry,
Wow.
like the idea of emanations from God.
Intelligence is flowing out from the source.
The soul's struggle in the material world and its eventual return.
These ideas show up everywhere.
He also points out the similarities between Masonic teachings.
And the doctrines of Philo.
The Jewish philosopher from Alexandria,
Yeah, Philo.
he talked about God as a central source of light,
The battle between light and darkness.
the creation through God's word and wisdom, the visible world reflecting the invisible.
And the soul's desire to break free from the body.
And Pike links these ideas to Masonic symbols,
Like the search for light.
the pillars of strength and wisdom.
The rituals of the apprentice.
Okay, now let's talk about Amun.
Who is a moon?
He started as a god in Lower Egypt, but he became the supreme god,
The big cheese.
the celestial lord who sheds light on hidden things.
So he's associated with light and knowledge.
Right, he's the source of life and power, embodies all the attributes of God. Pike calls him the pleroma, the fullness of things,
And also the light itself, the sun god.
the unchanging source of all that is.
Wow.
He also mentions this idea that the 7 planets influence our earthly lives.
Before the soul reaches the Elysian fields.
That was a big idea for the Platonists and the Gnostics.
Symbolized by the 7 seals.
That's like our journey is shaped by cosmic forces. He suggests that the Jewish communities in Syria and Judea,
We're kind of proto-Gnostics.
absorbing influences from the East.
From their time in exile.
Exactly. And through voluntary dispersion, too.
So they picked up Chaldean and Persian ideas.
Like Daniel getting a Babylonian name.
It's all about the blending of cultures.
Okay, now let's dive into Persian theology. They have this concept of Zerwan Akarin,
Limitless time.
the ultimate incomprehensible God.
The source of everything.
And from him comes the first emanation, primitive light. And from that light comes Ormuzd, the king of light.
Who creates the world through the word.
And then there are the Pharaohs, the thoughts of Ormuzd.
They protect humanity.
And then there's Ahriman, the second emanation. He gets jealous of Ormuzd and is condemned to darkness.
For 12,000 years.
So you've got this cosmic battle between good and evil, light and darkness.
And good eventually wins.
Led by Sosiosh, who regenerates the earth and judges everyone.
That's a pretty epic story.
It is. And Pike points out the similarities.
Between the teachings of Christ and the Essenes.
Even though the Essenes aren't mentioned in the New Testament,
Interesting.
he talks about John the Baptist too, his ascetic life, his message of repentance.
Charity, justice, nonviolence.
It's like they were on a similar wavelength. Okay, now, for some Phoenician cosmogony.
What's that all about?
They believed the Word of God was written in the stars
By planetary divinities.
and then communicated to humans. Their first principle was this mix of dark air and spirit.
which gave rise to the Word and then creation.
And they believed humans were children of light, worshiping the heavens,
Interesting.
with gods like Chrysler representing fire.
And Baal and Malakarth representing the sun and moon.
There's this story Pike mentions about a passage from John's Gospel.
Being found during the temple's rebuilding.
And he suggests that John's Gospel was partly a response to the Gnostics,
With its emphasis on Jesus as the Word.
Okay, back to Philo. He goes deeper into his ideas.
Like how?
He talks about the Supreme Being as primitive light, and the Word as God's image residing in his intelligence.
Acting in the universe.
And he lists all these roles of the Word.
The realm of ideas. An ancient divine entity.
A representative of intelligences. An archangel.
A model for spirits and humans. And the Creator itself.
He's saying Philo got a lot of this from Plato.
Makes sense.
And he also says the Word acts on God's behalf, protecting humanity.
Like the Ben H. Adams, Son of Man.
Then he compares Osiris, the Egyptian god,
To Ormuzd in Persian tradition.
both representing the Supreme Being, the source of good.
Battling against evil.
And he introduces Horori, the son of Isis and Osiris.
Destined to defeat Typhon.
And he brings up Zero and Akarine again, limitless time.
From whom Ormuzd emanates.
And creates the world through the Word.
It's like this universal pattern.
Okay, now for the Kabbalah, their big idea is that everything comes from an infinite source of light,
The primitive being.
sometimes called the Ancient of Days or the King of Light. And they say the world is God's self-revelation,
Existing only within him.
with his attributes reflected throughout the universe.
It's all connected.
Now, Pike throws in this curveball, this voice that questions everything.
What do you mean?
It doubts humanity's greatness, given all the conflict and selfishness.
Okay.
It brings up these shadows of horrible doubt,
Doubting revelation, spirituality, even a benevolent God.
asking if we're just puppets of fate, if all our philosophies are illusions.
That's pretty dark.
It's a moment of stark realism, challenging everything. But then he presents this new law taught by a revered figure.
Sounds familiar.
It does right. God is merciful, loves his creation.
Present in all things.
It's about brotherhood, forgiveness, tolerance,
The immortal soul, free will, equality before God.
and serving God through humility and kindness. Then he says, work and therein have well-being is the oldest gospel.
Work is sacred.
It is. He says it's our duty to fight against disorder and ignorance,
In the name of God.
to act now while we have time. He elevates all forms of labor,
As a kind of worship.
essential for human excellence and virtue. He also observes this pattern throughout history. Civilizations that get too wealthy and luxurious,
They tend to decline.
overtaken by those who are poorer, harder working, and more resilient.
Interesting.
He gives examples: Sidon, Tyre, Babylon, Palmyra, Rome.
The classic cautionary tales.
He says wealth has to be balanced with generosity and social responsibility.
Otherwise, we repeat the mistakes of the past.
And he encourages every Mason
To strive for greatness.
to do the noblest thing they can
Rejecting mediocrity.
and pursuing immortal aims.
Living a life of purpose.
He even says that's more impressive than any work of art.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Okay, back to the ancient mysteries.
Hmm.
Pike says those early attempts to understand the universe, they went beyond what humans could really grasp.
So they relied on symbolic analogies.
He says the mysteries of Masonic symbols are like that.
Revealing their secrets only to the prepared.
He mentions this recurring mythical figure, Hermes Zoroaster,
Bridging the human and the divine.
bringing civilization and connecting death with spiritual consolation.
Deep stuff.
He talks about the Egyptian priests and their secret knowledge, how they were respected and made Egypt a center of learning. He mentions Orpheus being initiated into their teachings.
And bringing those ideas to Greece.
He says initiation became increasingly mysterious.
With the name itself holding power and fear.
It promised a new life of reason and virtue, a positive view of death, an understanding of nature's secrets.
A restored soul. An ascent to heavenly realms.
And there were teachings about rewards and punishments in the afterlife. Those who refused initiation were ostracized.
And revealing secrets was severely punished.
It was serious business. Now the myth of Osiris, how he's slain by Typhon at the autumnal equinox,
And his body is dismembered.
and Isis searches for his remains. And mysteries were created to symbolically represent this.
Teaching piety and offering consolation.
He says it was all an allegory, with deeper meanings, only understood by initiates. He compares it to the mysteries of Eleusis,
Which were about guiding people toward piety.
and considered one of the most valuable religious institutions. Now, the Society of Initiates, they were these virtuous men working to free their souls from passion.
And develop social virtues.
He says the idea of Elysium being for initiates only reflected the idea that only the virtuous were allowed in sacred spaces. He says we don't know the exact details about the afterlife they taught, but they used representations of Tartarus and judgment, understood allegorically, and they taught the soul's immortality.
And the consequences of sin.
Okay, now the Orphic concept of the universal soul, often associated with Dionysus,
The god of wine and ecstasy.
he guides the individual soul back home through purification. Dionysus is also seen as the Mystes, or Hierophant,
The great spiritual mediator.
and they believe the human soul has a divine spark within it
Capable of achieving immortality.
through virtue and contemplation. He says the idea of being taken to the happy islands,
Is metaphorical.
true Elysium, is beyond the grave, and the death and descent of Dionysus,
Is the great secret of the mysteries.
reflecting the cycle of death and rebirth in nature. Okay, now for the symbolism of the phallus symphoides.
Representing the active and passive principles of the universe.
Initially, without any indecent connotations.
Okay.
He connects it to the Indian lingam, the boat and mast, and the point wood in a circle.
All expressing the union of those creative forces.
He mentions Gemini when the sun was in that sign at the vernal equinox, and suggests the phallus symbol might come from the bull.
When it marked the vernal equinox.
He talks about the Eleusinian invocation of heaven and earth as the father and mother of all creation.
Their union called a sacred marriage.
Okay, now the division of nature into light and darkness, good and evil. This is a constant theme. And the great symbolic egg reminds these initiates of this duality.
Okay.
He quotes Plutarch saying light and darkness form the basis of ancient theology. And the mysteries